Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Holdren, for coming to share with us today. I'd like to read for you a couple titles of some research grants that the National Science Foundation recently funded. Picturing Animals in National Geographic for the years 1888 to 2008, costing $227,000. Kinship, Women's Labor and China's Economic Performance in the 17th through 21st centuries, costing $267,000. Regulating Accountability and Transparency in China's dairy industry, costing $152,000. The press has reported, as I'm sure you know, many other examples of social and political science studies, and the committee's got obviously other examples of questionable studies that cost over $600,000. NSF's current spending on social, behavioral, and economic science studies is over $250 million a year. And the President's request increases this research spending over 7%, I'm sorry. Within that $250 million, staff says, approximately $10 million goes toward political science studies. This comes at a time when many households are being asked to pay more taxes to fund more studies like this, and the questions our constituents beg for answers to are, how do we justify such questionable studies as a priority for funding?
Well, I would offer a couple of comments. One, while I would certainly, I'm not qualified to even try to defend every social science grant that NSF has ever given, and it is a perilous business sometimes to try to determine from the title of a grant or even from a description of it what value it might have as fundamental research in social and behavioral sciences. What I will say is that there have been many extremely valuable, from the clear standpoint of the national interest, valuable studies funded by NSF in political science and other social and behavioral sciences. I'll give you one example. Eleanor Ostrom, the late Eleanor Ostrom, the only woman and the only political scientist ever to receive an economics Nobel Prize, did work showing that local management of resources held in common can be effective and sustainable without centralized regulatory control. This is a finding that should have considerable appeal on both sides of the aisle. Yep. She got a Nobel Prize for it. She was funded by a series of NSF grants in political science.
Well, I think we'll all agree that's probably a good subject to study. You know, how our economy works, how we make our economy better. But Chinese dairy industry regulation, China's economic performance, kinship, picturing animals, and I mean, it's just hard to conceive how those are important to our national security or our national interest. And you know, while I'm not advocating we stop all social science study spending, I just think it might be appropriate that much of that be left to the private sector. And I know the recently enacted Coburn Amendment requires that the director of the National Science Foundation certify that each and every social science study meets the criteria of promoting national security or economic interests of the United States of America. And I think that's a good and proper filter by which all future studies should be considered. Do you agree?
I respectfully do not agree. I think that is too narrowly drawn. I think there have been many beneficial results from research funded by NSF in the social, behavioral, and economic sciences that have contributed, for example, to a better understanding of how our democracy works and how to make it stronger, that have contributed to making our government more efficient. Saying that the only possible justifications are clear economic benefit or national security benefit, I think would leave out a variety of important domains of NSF research. And I think with respect to the private sector, we know that the private sector won't fund fundamental research.
Give me some of those other domains then, so maybe I can get a better handle
Okay,
on this bigger picture.
again, improving the efficiency of the United States government. There's been a huge amount of work
I think
supported
that's
by
an
NSF in
economic
that
interest
domain.
and a national security,
Well,
quite frankly.
you can make that argument, and maybe it is, but I think it's a dangerous thing for the Congress or anybody else to be trying to specify in detail what kinds of fundamental research the NSF should support. The NSF has developed on the whole an enormously respected track record in supporting basic research across the wide range of disciplines in which it works. And we know the private sector is not going to support basic research to the extent that society's interests require. The uncertainties are too great, the time scale for return too long, the appropriability of the results inadequate. This is a responsibility of the government to fund basic research, including basic research in social sciences. And if you say it has to have a specific application, you're pulling the rug out from under the capacity of the NSF to fund basic research.
Well, maybe some of my colleagues share my feelings and some of them don't, but you know, the picturing of animals in National Geographic costing $227,000, I don't think that's the basic, personally, research that American taxpayers need to foot the bill for. And I think if there's someone who thinks that's beneficial to them, perhaps they should start paying $227,000 for picturing animals in National Geographic during this period of time.
Gentleman's time.
Again, it's not my field. I cannot comment on what merit or lack of merit that particular project had as basic social science.
But do you think there should be some parameters?
Well, there are parameters, and there is an elaborate and rigorous review process at NSF. That is not to say it couldn't be made better.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Posey. The gentlewoman from Maryland, Ms. Edwards, is recognized.